Okay. This is dope. And let's see. Welcome, guys. Sorry, we're a little late. We're getting, we're a little better every time. That's what this is about. I think we are on both Twitch and on YouTube. So that's good. That's real progress. That's real progress. Twitter is like Twitter is, run by a buffoon. I don't know what else to tell you. So, what else can you do? Okay, interesting. I see, sorry. So the software has a feed that integrates both Twitch and YouTube chat, and then I'm also looking at YouTube chat itself. So I'm just trying to like finagle who all's here and doing what. I'm kind of fascinated. Thanks to California, Dale Diamond, good to see you. Thanks. Okay, I also see that I'm live on Twitch. I don't see anyone in the Twitch chat, but that's okay. Why, Michael Warren, what can we do to support the free world? Funny you should ask. We're working with Ukraine Aid Ops for, let's see if I can pin it here in the YouTube chat. We're working with Ukraine Aid Ops. They are raising funds for units fighting out of Kramatorsk. This is Azov, the Liut Brigade, a whole bunch of these guys. And so, of course, we're proud to support them. They also have some dope stuff. I've never seen, actually, they have the Kramatorsk Patrol Police. That is the patch for guys who donate $200, $250 or more. So I think that's dope. I think that is super sick, actually. And even cooler, we are almost a third of the way to the goal, which is cool because every dollar you donate gets matched by an anonymous donor. So the more we hook them up with, the better off everyone ends up with. Also, shout out to Avon on Twitch. That's kind of dope. So yeah. So let's see. Let me see. Okay, I'm gonna try to. I just want to see how. I just want to figure out this multi-chat thing. I need that. Okay. But I'm trying to find it. I literally have lost the chat. There was a chat. There's the popped up chat. There you go. All the other kids with the popped up chat. Right? Is that how that song goes? Okay. Someone on Twitch, Volorano, you look exactly how you look like in your YouTube videos. Amazing. That's because I record my YouTube videos in the same setup. If you haven't been here, if you haven't been to the channel before, we literally do things Asmongold style. Like we come in and we say, okay, wait, I see it. All right, multi-chat is feeding everything in. Okay, all right, this is good. This is good. The last time, the other thing that happened is normally I record the actual, chat, like I record these videos and I use that recording to sort of to clip it up into the long form YouTube videos. However, this software didn't record, and or I am too dumb to record. It's one or the other, tomato tomato. So given that, I had to actually screen grab the live stream. So I had to play the live stream on one of my monitors and then record it. It was a whole pain yesterday. Spectre 12-minute setup, no big deal. Exactly. That's what I say. I wonder how many people. Oh, we have 5 viewers on Twitch. Okay, that's cool. I mean, I know that's like, one, like 1/100th of what we have on YouTube. But hey, listen, it's cool. I'm a real Twitch streamer too. Yeah. Okay. So, you guys know the rules. They're pretty straightforward. So, if you guys want to drop a technology is hard, Biggie Smalls. Technology is so hard. So if you guys will have a question, right, by all means, drop a super chat or whatever the Twitch equivalent is, like bits or whatever. And I'll answer it. Generally, we're going to chat a little bit. I'm going to break down a story, and then we'll chat a little bit about the story. And then I'll break down the next story. So is my audio okay? I noticed in the last video I had this like buzzing on the background of my mic, and I have no conception of what's causing it. And it just is random. And I think it's from my mouth being too close to the mic, but I can't really tell. So it is what it is. It is what it is. So let's see. I just want to pull some stuff up, right? Just want to make sure things are like approximately. Okay. Audio's a little low. Okay. Let's see. That may be a function of just like me. All right. Screenboy, thanks for being the voice of democracy. I appreciate that. That's high compliment, okay? It's like Helldivers, right? You know, you got to defend democracy, except we actually have a functioning democracy. All right. Should we talk about the stories? Yeah, let's crack into it. Okay. I'm going to get them pulled up here. The Trump administration made it to the White House on the promise to keep free speech free. But are they rolling back that promise once they realize that free speech also applies to people who say mean things about your friends? I'm Paul, U.S. Army combat veteran. Let's talk about the state of free speech here in America. Now, hit that subscribe button because I know you guys won't. I see every video I do that criticizes the administration. I don't tend to make that many friends. In fact, it loses me subscribers, but that's okay because you're all wrong and I'm right. So the Pentagon has suspended an Army colonel for what it says is celebrating Charlie Kirk's death. Now, the Pentagon is investigating an active duty colonel. For those of you that don't know, this is a rank above lieutenant colonel. So generally someone with over 20 years of service. This is a flag grade officer. The officer in question is named Scott Stevens, who's been suspended from official duties after social media posts purportedly belonging to him celebrated the killing of Charlie Kirk, the Army told Fox News. Now, again, bear in mind, guys, I don't use Fox News as a source for much because they represent the administration's line. Like, they are truly in lockstep with the administration. But this is actually useful because it gives us the administration's perspective of what they're doing. And the Fox News spin on this is that this Army colonel reportedly made the following post. Quote, "The death of Charlie Kirk in Utah was tragic. However, we can take comfort in the fact that Charlie was doing what he loved best, spreading hate, racism, homophobia, misogyny, transphobia on college campuses," according to one post. He continued, quote, "I would offer empathy, but Charlie hated empathy. As we have been told in the wake of so many other tragedies, we have to move on. We can't make this political." The colonel was the commander of 1st Battalion, 4th Armored Regiment, 1st Armored Brigade. And then it says, had fashioned himself as an anti-sexual assault crusader in the Army because 5 years ago, he told Task and Purpose he had long been part of the problem with sexual assault and its cover-ups, right? Which is crazy because he says he's an anti-sexual assault crusader and then is like, yo, I covered up for sexual assaults as a commander, and I've sort of come to terms with that, and I've chosen in my later years to try to be more vocal and drag my peers along. So what's fascinating is that, again, Fox News out here trying to paint this dude as some kind of turbo leftist. But if you don't know if you know anything about the Army, you know that the Army just assigns in every single unit a sexual assault prevention officer. And it's not a job that you volunteer for. You just get told you're doing it, and you have to put on the classes, right? So again, this just reflects a real ignorance. But here's what I thought was more interesting. The Pentagon statement announced last week it would be tracking and, quote, would address active duty personnel who made public comments celebrating Kirk's death. The Pentagon said, quote, it is unacceptable for military personnel and Department of War civilians. By the way, guys, for those of you keeping track at home, the Department of War is not the official name. It is the Department of Defense. The executive branch tries to unilaterally rename it, but even their own executive order says that it is still the Department of Defense. The Department of War is just an official nickname given to it by the White House. Department of War civilians to celebrate or mock the assassination of a fellow American. The Department of War has zero tolerance for it. This is according to Sean Parnell, a spokesman. Right now, on Saturday, Army Reserve Major Brian Brintley, who went by Brian Harlow on social media, was suspended after he allegedly wrote several posts cheering on the killing, according to the Daily Caller. He said, quote, a monster died today. Quote, it's sad Charlie's kids are traumatized for life, but it's not a sad thing he's dead. Zero tolerance to the Department of War. Here's the thing, guys. Fun fact. Freedom of speech includes the freedom to mock people. Now, I know what you're going to say. You're going to say, Paul, in uniform, freedom of speech is subject to constraints that a regular American doesn't have. And that is absolutely correct. The reason those restrictions exist in the military, and again, I was an officer for many years and spent considerable time, another 7 years as a federal civilian. The reason those restrictions exist specifically is in the military is twofold. The first is because when you put on the uniform, you represent the military. And that means that you are operating in an official capacity. So sort of like saying, if I text my friend, let's say I'm the spokesman for Pepsi, and I text my friend, hey, I love Coca-Cola. That's fine. But if I text I love Coca-Cola from Pepsi's official Twitter account, well, Pepsi's going to be mad, and it's going to be detrimental to Pepsi's business. The same basic principle apply to the Army. They say, listen, if you're out of uniform, it doesn't matter. You have the right as a free American. You're a citizen. But when you're in uniform, you're speaking on behalf of the Army, whether you want to be or not, or the military. You also have this, constraint of the nature of war, which involves taking on missions of considerable risk. It means unquestioningly following orders. That means that if you create statements that are seen as like prejudicial to the integrity of command. So one of the biggest examples was actually soldiers who opposed the Iraq War. Soldiers who opposed the Iraq War would often go out there and be vocal about that. But if they were on active duty and they were vocal about it in really specific ways, like this is an illegal war or we should not do this, it was seen as, the criticism was seen as being prejudicial to the good order and discipline, because those units might actually be sent to Iraq, right? It's the same reason why it would be unacceptable, for example, for soldiers to sort of gather around the motor pool and have one soldier go, smoking a cigarette going, listen, this deployment coming up, this is bullshit. We're not going to do anything in Afghanistan. This is worthless. We shouldn't go. Right? Or if soldiers said that before a patrol, yeah, it's protected speech. It'd be protected speech for a civilian, but it's illegal speech for military. All that to say, Charlie Kirk, again, whose death is tragic and political violence has no business. And I think he was not someone I agree with politically. I agree with very few of his stances. But one of the stances that I do agree with is his stance on free speech absolutism. He himself said, there is no such thing as hate speech. A gross, uncomfortable, annoying speech is permitted in America under the First Amendment. And this is no example. This is no different. The fact is that Charlie Kirk was not an Army officer. He was not in the chain of command. He was not a representative of the United States government. He was not a congressman. He was not a governor. He was not a president. He was not a senior officer. Your opinions, the opinions of the military about Charlie Kirk have nothing to do with good order and discipline within the military, period. And so the fact is that I don't like these posts. Again, I don't like the message that he was a monster. I think it's cheap to sort of call someone you disagree with politically a monster, right? Just like I think it's, kind of cringy to be like, he was racist and a sexist and a misogynist, right? Or he spread hate, racism, homophobia. But guess what, guys? That is protected speech in America. And even if you are in the military, as long as you are not doing it in uniform, you still retain freedom of speech. And again, the incredible thing is that this was not criticism of anyone within the chain of command. This is not criticism of any one of America's elected officials, right? It is just more examples of the administration who came in saying, listen, the left is anti-free speech. They want to impose these de facto restrictions that are originating from the government on what you can and can't say. You know, they're trying to like term police the fundamental way people speak. And now they're turning around, and it turns out they were never really free speech warriors. They were just mad that someone else was trying to tell them what to say. So they weren't mad that speech wasn't free. They were just mad that they weren't the ones controlling speech. Here's another great example. It's more troubling than that because speech is upstream of the rest of the political process, right? How can you say things like, I oppose the Trump administration, right? You have the right to say even more extreme versions. You can have the right to say that the administration, this administration, the previous administration, you have a right to say that they're racists or that they're Nazis. You have a right to say a vast array of things. It is very hard to prove defamation in the United States. And there's a reason. And so when you see quotes like this is White House Chief of Staff Stephen Miller. This is a direct quote from him. He says, quote, "We will not live in fear, but you," referring to people who criticized Charlie Kirk after his killing, "you will live in exile because the power of law enforcement under President Trump's leadership will be used to find you. It will be used to take away your money, take away your power, and if you have broken the law, take away your freedom." So this is not how law enforcement works, by the way. This is how it works in Russia, where the law enforcement finds a person and then later on invents crimes to seize their assets, to literally put them in exile, which is not a punishment in the United States. We do not exile people. It's seen as cruel and unusual punishment prohibited by the Constitution. Right? But law enforcement doesn't exist simply to hunt someone down, steal their money and power, and then figure out if they've broken a law and imprison them. This is not how America works. And I understand Stephen Miller is a troll, but the fact is that he trolls and nobody ever pushes back on him. And the more unhinged, the more unwell the president seems, the more people like Stephen Miller are empowered, right? And before you sit there and go, oh, Paul, you're just some leftist, you can look through my videos. You can see I was unbelievably critical of the Biden administration. I was unbelievably critical even of Tim Walz, who I think misrepresented his military service in some key ways. But the fact is that the American Democratic Party has a problem of not doing anything, but not doing anything at least means that you get to retain your rights and liberties. Here's another example. The same First Amendment that protects freedom of speech, it explicitly says freedom of the press is rolled up in that. And that's true today more than ever. Because again, who decides, am I exercising my individual free speech, or am I a member of the press because I'm talking on YouTube? Is this media? Am I performing media and news and journalism, or am I an individual exercising their right to free expression? The answer is both. And so you see the president wants to continue this. He said today, quote, "I have the great honor of bringing a $15 billion defamation and libel lawsuit against the New York Times, one of the worst and most degenerate newspapers in the history of our country." By the way, guys, the entire net worth of the New York Times company is just $9 billion. So this is obviously like the equivalent of suing somebody for $15 gorgillion, right? It doesn't even make any sense. And defamation and libel, defamation requires spoken falsehoods, which are, the New York Times is a print magazine. I mean, I guess maybe they think they're like, oh, well, technically you were defamed on like a podcast or something. But he continues. He says they're a degenerate newspaper, not a crime, a virtual mouthpiece for the radical left, not a crime. I view it as the single largest illegal campaign contribution ever. No, that's not. A campaign contribution is monetary. Supporting a candidate is, again, a right prescribed by the Constitution. It's no more than, you don't see me saying, listen, Fox News should be purged from existence because they are a mouthpiece for the president. No, I'm like, we just acknowledge that's what Fox News is. They have every right to kiss the president's ass and glaze him, and we just accept it and move on as a function of living in a free country. Everybody but the president of the United States. He continues to say their endorsement of Kamala Harris was actually put dead center on the front page of the New York Times, something heretofore unheard of, exclamation mark. Again, still waiting for the part where he talks about a crime. He's engaged in a decades-long method of lying about your favorite president, me, my family, business, and the America First movement, MAGA, and our nation as a whole. I am proud to hold this once respectable rag responsible. We are doing with fake news networks, such as our successful litigation against George Soteropoulos, ABC, Disney, and 60 Minutes, CBS, Paramount, who knew they were falsely smearing me through a highly sophisticated system of document and visual alteration, which was, in effect, a malicious form of defamation. This is unbelievably not true. One, his lawsuit was not successful. They settled with the administration without admitting fault because they knew that the president would use every petty trick in his book to harass them, and it simply wasn't worth it. Again, it was not a successful litigation. A judge never ruled in their favor. What mostly happened is these agents, these companies, paid off the president, who, again, as you may recall, the CBS Paramount lawsuit was settled with a large payment to the president. And then days later, a crucial merger between CBS and Skydance was approved by the administration. Crazy, right? So again, they practice this long-term intent. They practice this long-term intent and pattern of abuse, which is both unacceptable and illegal. The New York Times have been allowed to freely lie, smear, and defame me for too long. This stops now. A suit is brought in the great state of Florida. Thank you for your attention to this matter. Okay, none of these things are defamation. In fact, it is literally almost impossible in the United States under our Constitution to defame a president. It is so hard because sometimes even hyperbole is protected speech, right? So that's why, for example, Stephen Miller can go on a podcast and say radical left Democrats are terrorists. That's a real quote from him, by the way. And we all know that the Democrats in Congress are many things, but they're so not terrorists. They're barely even alive, most of them. They're geriatric and essentially completely impotent and useless. Not even close to terrorism. But hyperbole is protected speech within the Constitution. Again, that's why I think Stephen Miller is a bad person, but he's not committing a crime by just saying these things, right? If he were to charge them with terrorism maliciously or use the DOJ to do so when there's no evidence to support it, then he'd be a criminal. But this sort of action is obviously transparently an effort to coerce opposition media. And what I think is even more wild is that they've gone so far that even MAGA's own base is mad at them, because Pam Bondi, the attorney general, came out and said, listen, you ne'er-do-wells, there's free speech, but then there's also hate speech. I'll try to find you the exact quote. And even MAGA themselves absolutely lost their shit. Here we go. Let's see if ABC News will let me actually watch them here. Okay. So here you go. Bondi said the DOJ is actually planning on targeting anyone who engages in what she called hate speech. By the way, hate speech, as in her definition, is expressing criticism of the late Charlie Kirk. She said, quote, "There's free speech and then there's hate speech, and there's no place, especially now, especially after what happened to Charlie, in our society." She continued, "Do you see more law enforcement going after these groups who use hate speech and putting cuffs on people so we show them some action is better than no action?" Miller asked in response. She said, "We will absolutely target you, go after you if you are targeting anyone with hate speech. That's across the aisle," Bondi responded. Now, again, many people responded with a 2024 post from Charlie Kirk in which he said, quote, hate speech does not exist legally in America. There's ugly speech, gross speech, there's evil speech. All of it is protected by the First Amendment. Keep America free." And again, shout out Charlie Kirk for being absolutely 100% correct. If you don't like hate speech, just don't listen to it, or just say something nice in response. Okay? And this is something that even MAGA themselves doesn't support. Then she continued, she doubled down saying, well, listen, actually, hate speech that crosses the line into threats of violence is not protected by the First Amendment. It's a crime. This is true. But but it doesn't have to be hate speech. Like, it'd be a crime if I texted my neighbor and been like, "I'm going to effing kill you." Like, that's a crime. It's not hate speech, right? It's just because I'm mad that he didn't cut his grass or whatever. So you could see even Pam Bondi, right? The administration is so committed to this that even the MAGA base themselves are like, "Hey, no, like don't do this," because the MAGA hardcore people, they understand that if you give the government this power, the next administration can use it to target you. As we've talked about, the whole reason for this is because when you give the government a power, you have to acknowledge that that same power will be possessed by individuals you don't like. Again, imagine if there was a turbo woke president in the future who was like, "I'm going to go after you guys you guys aren't sufficiently sad at the killing of this person or that person. I'm going to go after you." So this is just absolutely a huge betrayal. You know it's bad when even the administration's stands are out here loving it, right? You have GOP lawmakers, right, seeking lifetime bans for social media users celebrating Kirk's assassination. These are all actions that are absolutely not permitted in the Constitution. The government coercing private companies to do something where the private companies are acting on behalf of the government, that is also an illegal curtailment of free speech, right? The only time you have these kinds of things is where you go, listen, we're Facebook, and we, without government intervention or influence, have independently come to a decision that we want to ban accounts that do certain things. Okay, that's their decision because they're a private company, right? Again, this is something that has been settled with considerable lawsuits. It's the reason why legally a gay person can order a cake from a bakery. The bakery can go, "Listen, I'm not going to do this. You're compelling me to make speech that I disagree with." And the Supreme Court said, "Yeah, you're right. You're right." Like, you cannot force someone to produce written or artistic work that says something that they don't believe in. So again, you hope that this sort of thing backfires. I really do. But I am so skeptical and I'm so worried because the danger of coercing free speech, of controlling it, is that once you do it, you prevent the very thing that can push back on it. Again, what happens if the president makes good on silencing left-wing media outlets, left-wing organizers? Well, does that feel like we have a competitive democracy where two sides make their case to the American public in an election and then each side gets to vote? The scales are already screwed up because of campaign finances. And now we're going to screw them up more by saying, hey, whoever's in the White House, they actually have the ability to revoke the broadcast licenses or to impose a bunch of taxes or bury their opposition outlets under a flood of lawsuits until they simply give up, right? All of these things are what's called in international relations competitive authoritarianism. This is this idea, like Russia, remember, Putin won elections. He won elections against guys like Alexei Navalny. But the reason is that Putin got to be in charge of all media in Russia, and Alexei Navalny got put in jail before every single election. So do you see how there might have been elections in Russia? But there might have even been opposition in Russia. But because people like Vladimir Putin and other autocrats get to put their finger on the scale, they're never really free or fair in any meaningful way. And the fear is that without free speech, America is going to go down the same path. Okay, wow, that was longer than I thought it was going to be. All right, thanks, Scream Boy, for the £5. Nice. Thank you for supporting Ukraine. I've learned a lot from you. Do you think Russia and Europe war now is now inevitable? So here's the thing that I think is a big takeaway from this, is that, and this is, I can't claim credit for this idea. This is actually from Andrew Bustamante, the Everyday Spy guy. He made a really good point. He was like, you know, when 200 years ago, if you conquered a country, right? If Germany conquered France, what was their intention by doing that? A lot of times they said, okay, well, we want to ensure this neighboring country isn't a threat, and we want access and control of some of their key industries. Well, in a modern economy, what do you have to do? What do you want to do by fighting another country, right? And is doing so best achieved through war in this sense, right? In the sense of like UK soldiers and Russian soldiers pew-pewing at each other, right? Because you got to think, what is Russia's actual goal? Well, Russia is to expand its sphere of influence. It's to turn all of Eastern Europe into Belarus, into puppet states. Well, does it need to invade Belarus? No, it just needs to have a friendly government, and one whose ruling class is economically dependent on Russia, and where Russia can extract resources from Belarus, right? Can extract them on favorable terms. That's why China wants to do these deals with Russia. It's not because China is like, hey, we don't want to march through Russia. That's a waste of our time. It would be an expensive, dangerous occupation. Instead, what would we want from an occupation of Russia? Well, we'd want Russia to stop fighting us in certain like Eurasian geopolitical situations. We'd want access to Russian goods and services, and we'd want Russia to comply with all of our international schemes. So if we want to invade Taiwan, we'd want Russia to support us economically and politically. Well, if China can achieve all that without actually going in and like having Chinese paratroopers shoot people in Moscow, that's what they're going to do. So all this to say, in some ways, a Russia-Europe war is happening. It's happening right now because Russia is using what it calls hybrid warfare, information operations, social media operations, clandestine intelligence collection, as well as literal military threats and use of force to coerce European governments to acquiesce to their demands. And in some cases, they're very narrow. They say, listen, we just want you to abandon NATO and do more exercises with us, right? And they'll say, well, if you abandon NATO, then you're going to need a large security partner. And it's going to be us. So you see how this whole thing, like, that's how you have to think of things. What is the goal? What is the actual goals relative to conquest? Because again, in today's day and age, it used to be that if you had more farmland than the other guy, your people were better fed, you were a more prosperous, thriving economy. But now it's not quite like that, right? It's about people, it's about access to markets, it's about capital control and leverage. And so the takeaway that you have to remember is that like the actual act of conquest looks different. A friendly government, getting your adversaries to let this country be economically linked to someone else, an unwillingness to defer, right? An inability or unwillingness to oppose you on international schemes and stages. All of that, right? Russia has all the land it needs. Russia has all land it needs. It needs people. It needs economic ability, but it needs, this is, if you ever read Alexander Dugin, he laid out exactly what Putin's been doing for the last 2 decades. And he said, taking Ukraine is, Russia only really needs Ukraine in the east. They just need the Ukrainian government that is subordinate to Moscow, that is deferential and not aligned with the West. Dugin's like, that's all you need to do, right? Because he's like, there's no, again, Dugin's thesis is essentially a subset of fascism that says that the Russian people, the Russian speakers, ethnic Russians are the superior people. They're the natural rulers of Eurasia, and it's natural and right that other countries are subordinate to them, are controlled and dominated by them, right? And Ukraine, or Ukrainians, right, people with a distinct Ukrainian identity, are those subordinates. Chris Frederick, even if Russia won, which they can't, they can never occupy Ukraine, which is the hard part, let alone repair their damage they've done. That's right. Yeah. I mean, Russia has destroyed everywhere it's conquered, essentially. And at this point, it's become more of a showdown with NATO and a proof of point. But their idea, they don't have to occupy Ukraine. Their goal would actually be to get Ukraine, again, their Ukrainian neutrality is to say, listen, Ukraine can't have any links to NATO, because who decides if Ukraine has actually violated neutrality? It's implied that Putin wants that. Putin wants that veto power. So all Putin wants is a piece of paper from NATO, signed by NATO and Ukraine, that says, Putin, you get to decide. You get veto power over every Ukrainian international agreement and treaty. And if you get to decide if it's yeah, Jacob Andrew, I didn't, because the Chinese Foreign Ministry are liars. The question is, did you see what Chinese Foreign Ministry said about Trump's NATO tariffs? The answer is that the answer is I didn't, because I don't trust the Chinese. I'll say this: Trump's NATO tariffs are so obviously performative. They are the Europeans, right, need time and effort, and they need more time, right? Their plan is to be completely weaned off of Russian oil in the next, I think, 2 years, 24 months, maybe 18 months. That's been the plan since the start of the war. The Europeans are like, listen, we can't just shut it off overnight. So, you know, this is part of a gradual plan. And we're going to talk about the fact later on in the video that, well, you know, Russian oil and gas industry is still getting cooked pretty badly. So, you know, the whole idea that is necessary. One, for Trump's been in office almost 9 months now. This is the first time this has ever come up. Every day is a new policy that President Trump thinks up, and all the policies lead to the same place: an excuse to not do anything against Vladimir Putin, because he supports Vladimir Putin. That's it. He's just, everything is just talk. It's empty talk. NATO could give him everything he wants, and he would just make up some other excuse. It's all it is. If he was serious about it, he would be like, hey, we'll give you we'll give you guys all the oil you want. We're America. We're an oil exporter. We'll give you guys tariff free. But he doesn't do that. He tariffed everybody except for Russia, actually. Except for Russia. Interesting. Conquestor. They've had time and effort. They need to subsidize oil and gas against loans and import more. At this point, they're complicit. I think the Europeans are nothing if not slow and unable to do these sort of things. I think they absolutely could. They may not. I think they set that goal during a time of much higher inflation. You know, I think you're right, but I think the United States saying we can't do anything until this happens is a cop-out. It's a cop-out because, again, if that was the plan, if that was the policy on day one, then Trump should have done it. He should have told the Europeans and helped them do it, right? But he didn't. He tariffed them, made gas from the United States more expensive, which in effect favored Russia. He didn't tariff Russia at all. And by the way, there's still lots of Russian companies that aren't sanctioned. Rosatom, for example, totally unsanctioned entity. So again, I'm not saying the Europeans are like doing everything they can, but if Trump was serious, he would have actually taken action to help them, but he's not. And so it's obvious. And here's the thing. Trump said every NATO country has to do it, which obviously Robert Fico in Slovakia, Viktor Orban in Hungary, and Erdogan in Turkey, never going to do it. They love Putin more than Trump does. So it's never going to happen, and he knows it. William Parrish, great job on content. Thanks for the hard work. The world needs you. If you don't mind, when in Ukraine, what convinced you Ukraine would win? Here's what I'll say. Ukraine, what convinced me Ukraine will win, and I'm not convinced, right? Because if I was convinced, I wouldn't have to look at it and criticize it and fundraise for it and talk about it. Like, nothing in this world is guaranteed. But the fundamental fact is that the U.S. in the Vietnam War, we deployed a lot of munitions and a lot of firepower, and we had a draft, and we did so much to try to break the North Korean or the North Vietnamese, and we never came close. We never even came close. And I think people underestimate how hard people are willing to fight, especially the Ukrainians, because you have to understand that to a Ukrainian, less than 100 years ago, the Russians took over Ukraine and they genocided them. Look up the Holodomor. You may say, oh, it wasn't a real genocide. It was just an engineered starvation that targeted only ethnic Ukrainians. And that's fine. But it doesn't matter what we think. To the Ukrainians, they have a fucking huge memorial, a whole museum of what happened there. And so for them, they're like, if we fail, if the Russians win, then Ukrainians are going to get erased from history, right? There will be no Ukrainian children. That is their mentality. So never underestimate like the willingness of people to fight in that way. Again, and that's part of Putin's narrative. Putin's narrative is to push back and say, technically Russians and Ukrainians are one people, but also Russians are the superior people, right? Putin's narrative doesn't make any sense. That's right. Yeah. Okay. Should we talk about all right, let's talk about some questionable decisions from the Ukrainian high command. Okay, let me finagle some stuff. All right, let's do it. Is the Ukrainian top commander firing his subordinates for the crime of executing the strategy? Just why is the Ukrainian plan making the commander so angry, especially as it seems like Russia is increasingly faltering on the battlefield? I'm Paul, U.S. Army combat veteran. Let's talk about it. So this is an interesting story that's kind of a follow-up to another post that we talked about from the Kiev Independent, where reportedly the commander-in-chief, General Syrskyi, has become increasingly Soviet in his tactical choices. Now, what's fascinating about this is that, well, fascinating and kind of grim, is that the previous story reported that oftentimes the Soviet mentality was sacrificing soldiers in exchange for even minor tactical advantages. And in the case of Syrskyi, that has meant sacrificing tremendous amounts of infantry to hold positions to the last man, simply to make Russian efforts to advance more difficult. And this has been really reflected in the recent dismissal of two high-level commanders, the 17th and 20th Army Corps. And this is the first senior personnel changes since Zelensky announced in February that the Ukrainian armed forces would move to a corps-based structure. And these are two corps commanders. Both commanders were reportedly moved about 2 weeks ago following what they described as battlefield losses in the areas under their command. The 17th Corps was responsible for the front line south of Zaporizhzhia, where Ukrainian forces lost control of a village called Kamyanska and were partially driven out of Plavny, both along the Dnipro. The 20th Corps was between Donetsk and Dnipropetrovsk Oblast, where Russian forces crossed in August, digging into the latter region for the first time. And what I think is, now this article talks about, these this core system command structure that supposedly is going to be more efficient. But the overstretched character of Ukraine's army along hundreds of kilometers and the lack of strategic reserve mean that reorganizing units' sectors is kind of impossible because, well, you can't simply pull people out and put them into new places because, well, you can't actually abandon a sector. The best you can probably do is keep the sector online and move who the units are assigned to, but doing that mid-attack or mid-defense is actually really, really hard. But more fundamental is that reportedly these commanders were actually fired because they misreported the actual status of infantry and territory being held. And this is something that has been discussed, is that for a lot of these Ukrainian units, there is a massive shortage of infantry. And the truth is that these infantry formations aren't actually the ones holding the line. In a lot of cases, the so-called gray zone within the battlefield is much deeper even than is depicted here. So typically, from what I've heard in other reporting, that the gray zone can span up to 10 kilometers. This is areas that essentially, think of it as drone no man's land, where you have to cross a wall of FPV drones, reconnaissance drones, ground drones, just to find a Ukrainian position. And then, only then, once you find that position, can the Russians engage them and try to drive them out. And this is actually proven a very efficient strategy for the Ukrainians. And a lot of commanders, not by choice, but by force, simply by having so few infantrymen that they say, listen, I can't put an infantryman right here. Like, he's too valuable. We have too few of them. So instead, they say, listen, we're going to put them back here, and we're going to make these Russians cross drone after drone after drone. But what does that mean? That means if you could map where a Russian actually is throughout the day, what you would have is an assault team, dozens of assault teams crossing into these regions. Some of them are blown up. Some of them get turned around. Some of them make it far in, but they all end up getting ground down. And then the next day, the Russians are back, and they send another two-man team this way or that way, trying to probe and find those Ukrainian positions. And so the real front line, right, is the no man's land is just simply deeper than anyone could have expected. Instead of simply a whistle-blown charge up over the hill like World War I, what you have instead is two dudes who are told simply, hey, wander until you get killed or until you find a Ukrainian position, which itself has only 1 to 2 people in it. And so this reality is something, though, the problem is that sometimes Russia makes these advances, right? They might move a couple kilometers forward and then dig in. And that's technically lost territory. And so now to Ukrainian commanders, they say, listen, it's not lost territory because it's simply no man's land. They're just getting closer to this no man's land. But when Ukrainians' high command's priority is preserving territory, because as they perceive it, every square inch that Russia advances is going to be something that is probably going to get frozen in place in any kind of peace deal, right? So that is the political incentive here. But the issue is that it's a little bit of like a company going bankrupt to make sure they pay a quarterly dividend, where, yes, in the short term, it is probably good to see the Ukrainian forces delay Russian advances. But in the long term, what's really going to help them is simply killing a lot of Russians. And as we've talked about, that is honestly a better strategy here, is to maximize Russian casualties to create a politically untenable situation within Russia. As we've talked about on this channel, as North Koreans found, or North Vietnamese. The North Vietnamese never won an engagement against the United States. Not once. The United States, if they wanted to hold a region or hold a base, no North Vietnamese attack was ever able to dislodge them. And yet, eventually, the U.S. simply became exhausted. They had taken too many casualties. They expended too many resources. In fact, they literally had to alter how their very currency was structured. Nixon had to close the gold window because the U.S. was so badly in debt from the Vietnam War. That was the actual path to victory all along. And so when you're talking about targeting Russia, the actual path to victory is not whether or not they take Pokrovsk in 6 months or in a year, right? Which is what we've seen. We've seen Russia just comically small, comically low in terms of their advance in Donetsk. But instead, the actual win against Russia is not going to be whether they advance at 100 meters a day or 200 meters a day. It's going to be whether or not the Russian political system and the Russian economic system can sustain 3 years of high intensity combat. And that is the actual path to victory. And one of the things I want to point out is that it seems like it's working, right? Russia claims to be hitting these massive recruitment numbers, but look, their key regions, their key fights in Donetsk, look, we're seeing more and more Ukrainian forces actually roll Russia back. Not everywhere, but in a lot of key areas. Again, we're seeing some Russian advances in other parts of the front, sure, near Yampil and Seversk, but to me, the more interesting takeaway is, again, the fact that these Russian forces are looking increasingly cut off, pieced apart, unable to be relieved by other Russian forces. And this is the Russian ground zero. This is the main effort here. And for all of their effort, for hundreds of thousands of lives, they still haven't taken even Pokrovsk. And again, when I was in Ukraine nearly a year ago, they were still like, Pokrovsk is under threat. The Russians are going to take Pokrovsk any day now. And here we are a year later, and the city still stands. So again, I think there's also a lesson here that the Ukrainians were willing to make those sort of trade-offs when the U.S. was willing to endorse them. And now, without U.S. assistance in planning and executing, and U.S. intelligence sharing, right? The Ukrainians are probably increasingly relying on tried and true tactics that feel safe and comfortable and known, and in this case, extremely, extremely Soviet. All right, let's see. All right, guys, let's see. Okay. Yeah, David points out the Soviet Union fell after its defeat in Afghanistan. Yeah, it's very hard for authoritarian, because as we've talked about, authoritarian political systems, like people, basically the deal they're offered is to say, listen, you lose your freedom to do a lot or say things in exchange for strength, in exchange for the protection and strength that we bring to the table. And the issue is that when you lose a war as a strong man, people go, well, then what the fuck was all this for? Why do you have to imprison political opponents? Why do you have to silence dissent at every turn? You do all this, and for what? To what end? You're weak, right? The Soviets lost to a bunch of fucking Afghan goat farmers. And so that, I think, is the reality, that these authoritarian countries are stuck with. Democratic countries can lose a war because the people that lost it, you can just vote them out. Again, look after Vietnam. Nixon and tons of the Republicans got voted out. There was a huge, basically the senior congressmen in today's Congress, they all came into office in the post-Vietnam era in the 70s. Right? 400-year-old Chuck Schumer, 800-year-old Nancy Pelosi. Like, let's see. She became a U.S. representative. God, she looks like a fucking ghoul. Okay? Yeah. She literally 87. 87, dude. So again, you're talking about before that, she was the chair of the California Democratic Party in the 80s. So she came into politics. okay, just like Chuck Schumer, in this post-Vietnam sort of retrenchment, right? This wiping away that the U.S. voter got to do. It's like they got to have a controlled revolution. And you contrast this with authoritarian governments, where if you want out, once they lose a war, once they look weak and pathetic, like there's no other way to get them out other than revolution or coup. It doesn't always mean that this is like a broad-based, like, power to the people. It could literally be, in this case, 15 Russian oligarchs with a collective net worth of a third of Russia's GDP going, listen, for 4 years now, we've been going broke dealing with this guy. And we got 1 million dead Russians, and we can't take fucking Kramatorsk. I think this dude needs to go, you know? All right. You guys want to talk about the U.S. blowing up some Venezuelan drug boats? Let's see. The U.S. government has... Whoa. The U.S. government has blown up another Venezuelan drug boat, this time saying that they were totally carrying drugs, definitely for surezies this time. But is it increasingly looking like the U.S. is just sort of bombing randos for no reason? Just how do we know this was really a drug operation? And is this even serving U.S. strategic interests? I'm Paul, U.S. Army combat veteran. Let's talk about the administration's war on Venezuelan drug traffickers. So, this is according to the U.S. president, who says, listen, guys, we destroyed another Venezuelan drug boat, killing 3 people this time. He says that the Venezuelan drug vessel was traveling in international waters on the way to the U.S. He said that 3 men were killed in the attack and that they were violent drug trafficking cartels. He, of course, was a little scant on evidence that the boat was carrying drugs, but this is not itself that unusual because, again, sometimes U.S. intelligence, by showing what they know, they oftentimes... would also unveil sources and methods that would mean that, like, for example, let's say they had a source inside the cartel. If they knew the names or people on the boat, they might out that source. So that itself is not unusual. Of course, Nicolas Maduro and the Caracas government said this was U.S. aggression and called Marco Rubio the Lord of Death and War, which is actually, like, pretty sick. That's a badass name, and we all know Marco Rubio isn't even the Lord of the Department of State. Right? That, of course, title is Benjamin Netanyahu. So we've seen more and more of the U.S. deploying its warships and even some F-35s to the Caribbean, doing counter-narcotics operations. And this is Trump's actual statement. He says, this morning, on my orders, capital O, U.S. military forces conducted a second kinetic strike against positively identified, extraordinarily violent drug trafficking cartels and narco-terrorists in the Southcom area of responsibility. Someone else wrote this because on order is a military term, Southcom area of responsibility. This, for the first time, I think, ever in a Trump tweet, he actually gets capitalization wrong. Area of responsibility, Southcom area of responsibility is a proper noun. There's a bunch of other weird, grammatically nonsensical shit, right? Like a kinetic strike. Guys, all strikes are kinetic. There's no non-kinetic strike, okay? But he also uses the term positively identified. And I want you guys to just put a pin in that for a second. We're going to talk about it. Trump continues. This strike was confirmed while these confirmed narco-terrorists from Venezuela were in international waters transporting illegal narcotics, which is a weapon poisoning Americans, headed to the U.S. These extremely violent drug trafficking cartels pose a threat to U.S. national security, foreign policy, and vital U.S. interests. The strike resulted in 3 male terrorists killed in action. No U.S. forces were harmed in the strike. If you're transporting drugs and kill Americans, we are hunting you. The illicit activities by these cartels have wrought devastating consequences on American communities for decades and killing millions of American citizens. I don't think that's the right number. I think it's like hundreds of thousands. It doesn't matter. If someone's killing 100,000 American citizens, yeah, like, we should take action. But I think there's some key some of the key points here. And the one I want to point out most strikingly is this positive identification. This is an unusual drop because what this is in Afghanistan, we had what was called the ROE, or the rules of engagement. And because it was so bad in a counterinsurgency to kill civilians, to unwittingly kill civilians, that the rule was that you had to have positive ID on a combatant. What does positive ID mean? Well, it means that you cannot infer the location of an enemy, right? You have to have actual visual identification of the enemy's location and activities. So, as they say, if, let's say, someone shoots at you with an AK, they go, pow, 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 and they dive into a house, you can't shoot the house, right? Let's say someone shoots you with an AK, pow, 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 pow. They dive under a wall. They crawl for a little bit, and they pop up. But wait, they're holding a shovel now. They're a farmer. You've lost positive ID, okay? You have to have affirmative identification of an enemy, right? And it doesn't have to be, you have to see the dude, right? A muzzle flash in your direction of shots coming at you, that is sufficient positive identification. And so this produced some outcomes that U.S. soldiers thought were fucking insane. For example, you would have a dude sitting there filming you on a cell phone camera 100 feet away, and then you would roll over an IED and get blown up. And the cell phone camera guy would, like, beep, get his video, put his cell phone in his pocket, and just bebop away. And we'd be like, that dude knew we were going to get blown up. He was recording us as it happened. He was just standing there. He's obviously a combatant. And they'd be like, no positive ID, buddy, right? Or you'd even see somebody who was like the trigger man for the IED. And you'd go, well, you better, maybe he was just calling his mom at the moment you blew up. So positive ID is really an annoyingly high standard. And obviously we lost in Afghanistan, so soldiers were right. Trying to kill an enemy by not killing them is kind of preposterous, right? But the problem is that this is also a reference to the senior Democratic senator who was briefed by DOD staff on the previous strike on the boat in the Caribbean, right? Particularly, this was Senator Jack Reed of the Senate Armed Services Committee. Now, as we talked about, the U.S., we don't publicly disclose some info that could unveil sources and methods about strikes. But what we do to ensure there's some level of democratic accountability, right? Because the Constitution mandates that all acts of war, all war must be approved by Congress. And Congress has all these requirements that they've imposed. And so part of these requirements are met by the Senate and House receiving classified briefings behind closed doors about any kind of military action taken. And what Senator Reed said is, quote, the administration, they, have offered no positive ID that the boat was Venezuelan, nor that its crew were members of Tren de Aragua or any other cartel, right? The briefers also acknowledged they didn't know exactly where the targets were headed, and this was essentially confirmed by Marco Rubio. Trump said that this boat was en route to the U.S., which is obviously absurd because you can look, it's a little skiff. It's obviously not going to make it to the U.S. Marco Rubio said initially, quote, these particular drugs were probably headed to Trinidad or some other country in the Caribbean, at which point they just contribute to the instability those countries are facing, right? There's other sources that said actually they thought the boat might have been turning around, and again, whether it posed an immediate threat to the U.S. and you know, whether these people were even combatants. And so this is all pretty fraught. Now, this is why the president is really doubling down on this. We had positive ID. Well, we had positive ID that they were a boat from Venezuela. But there's some other, like, this is not one of these things that's the Trump administration's original sin, right? Let's see if I can find this here. So I think actually one of these problems is, I believe it's, let's see. Actually, I don't think this is the right guy. Obama. Let's see. Let's see. This is important. This is important enough. There we go. Okay. I had his name wrong. This is a story of Anwar al-Awlaki. Now, Anwar al-Awlaki is well, he is a problem. He is essentially a bad case study. So he died September 30th, 2011 at age 40 in Yemen. He was killed by a drone strike, and he was a pretty active terrorist, right? He supported terrorism. He was an Islamic fundamentalist, but he was also the child of a Yemeni scholar and politician, current serving actually agriculture minister of Yemen. But he was born, crucially, in 1971 in Las Cruces, New Mexico. So this guy was an American citizen. And he was killed by a drone strike in Yemen. But here's where things are fraught. Because he was not a combatant. And this was ordered by President Obama. And he was the first U.S. citizen targeted and assassinated by a government drone strike. And they said he was a key organizer for Al-Qaeda. But this is where things get pretty weird. Is that by organizer, they mostly mean he made propaganda, right? Now, he was radicalized. He had some vicious ideas. He was linked to Nidal Hassan, the perpetrator of the 2009 Fort Hood shooting, right? Was linked to another guy who tried to detonate a bomb on an airline. Like, he was not a good dude. Now, the U.S., right? The Yemeni government tried him in absentia for plotting to kill foreigners and being a member of Al-Qaeda, but ultimately, he was put on a kill list by Barack Obama, and he essentially had his civil liberties unilaterally revoked. Again, not because he was a combatant. He never held a weapon. It wasn't even clear he was doing organizing. Instead, he appeared to just be a propagandist, right? He wrote essays. He made YouTube videos. This is all like he wasn't a good person, and he was affiliated with some of the worst terrorists of the era. But he was an American citizen who was just killed in a drone strike because the American government was like, we think you're a terrorist. It's a lot of work to have to try you as a combatant. And so we're going to just kill you. And so the problem is, again, we've talked about this in other videos. The dangerous thing you do when you play these kind of games, and President Obama, this was his. He owns this. The dangerous thing is that when you do this, when you go, listen, this dude, he was friends with every major terrorist. He is clearly deeply involved with these terror organizations. And sure, he himself isn't picking up a weapon or planting a bomb, but he's so involved. And yeah, he's an American citizen, but he's living in Yemen, and the Yemeni government really wants him. So they say, let's just fucking kill him. Let's just kill him. Let's just get rid of this dude. But the problem is that when you do this, here we are 15 years later, and you have the president using the same basic rhetoric. Well, we decided these guys are terrorists. We don't really know who they are, but we know who they're not. We know they're terrorists. And yeah, they weren't holding a weapon, or they weren't like firing a gun. They didn't really threaten U.S. forces. It's not even clear they were going to the United States. But we still just think we're allowed to kill them because we called them terrorists. And Congress has passed an authorization for use of military force. It says, listen, if someone's a terrorist, the American military can go after them wherever they are. And so once you call them a terrorist, you can then go ahead and kill them. And so that policy now feels like it's a little bit kind of biting us in the butt. And the other issue is that, they say, okay, this is a, that this is a pressing issue, that these Venezuelan drug cartels are huge. But here's from the DEA's website. This is their National Drug Threat Assessment in 2024. Okay. So fentanyl is the deadliest drug in America. It killed 40,000 Americans the first 6 months of 2023 alone. Right. But these originate, again, they say Mexican cartels profit by producing these synthetic drugs like fentanyl and methamphetamine. that are not subject to the same production challenges as plant-based drugs. So Trump's own DEA says, well, they're mostly Mexican-based. In fact, they name the cartels that produce these things. They say it's Sinaloa and Jalisco Nueva Generacion, right? They are the main criminal organizations in Mexico and the most dangerous. But this is sort of key. And they also engage in migrant smuggling, sex trafficking, bribery, extortion, and a host of other crimes, extending the reach of drug markets. In fact, I'm going to see if we can even find... There's no mention in this document at all of Tren de Aragua. Is there any mention of Venezuela? Then, oh my gosh. Nothing. No mention in the DEA's own report. Trump's own DEA says these guys are producing so little of the drugs that come into the country, they are a rounding error. And so, again, what I think is the takeaway here is that this isn't even like these terrorists who are like hubs of networks, right? Who are major contributors. This is an ancillary organization that the president has just sort of said, well, they're terrorists because they're doing drugs. They're moving drugs. And I get it. There's narco-terrorists. But those are groups like FARC who say, listen, we have a political violence wing that wants to perform the leftist revolution in Colombia. And then we also have a drug manufacturing wing that funds our operation. This is the narco-terrorism. Narcotics fund the terrorism. And that's just not true. That's just not how this is working. Tren de Aragua is a money-making operation, perhaps through the Venezuelan government, but tiny in scale, so small that, again, the Secretary of State was like, we couldn't even find a boat that was going to the U.S. from Venezuela. We literally couldn't find it. So we just killed a boat going to Trinidad. And so the fear that you have is that, again, this is the continuation of an existing policy. And that's a policy that says that the president can kill anyone they want outside the United States. Again, it started with Obama saying, we're just going to kill this one really nasty American. Sure, he still has civil rights, but he's in Yemen. Who's going to know? And then that expanded and expanded and expanded. And now we go, hey, if you're a boat moving from Venezuela in international waters, we'll just fucking kill you. And, like, again, this isn't me being like drugs are good. Drugs are bad. U.S. Coast Guard should interdict and seize those drugs, search the ship, and arrest and charge the criminals that are doing it. If someone's committing a crime, I don't know, arrest them? Just a thought. You can't just kill people you don't like. I don't know. That's just not the American way, right? That's all I had, guys. Appreciate you. Hit subscribe. Okay. Yeah, I see the talk, man. Right. These guys aren't even doing fentanyl. Like, that's what I think is so weird. Like, you think there'd be a lot more like fentanyl stuff. David Vermont asked, did it start with Obama? Probably not. But I think of that as being like the seminal public case, right? And the thing is, what makes him unique is that he wasn't a combatant. There were U.S. citizens who were killed in combat fighting with the Mujahideen and fighting with ISIS. Like, those things happened. But it's different legally if somebody's like, hey, I'm going to pick up a gun, I'm going to fight. It's like U.S. citizens, right, volunteer to fight for the Russian military, as we talked about on this channel. And ultimately, yeah, they'll probably be killed by U.S. weapons. They could even be killed by U.S. intelligence that's given to the Ukrainians. But that's different. These guys signed up to be combatants. It's not clear that this guy, al-Awlaki, or these Venezuelans were combatants in any sense that you and I would consider it. Bill Lockie, yeah, the U.S. arguably lost on 9/11. Yeah, no, it's true. And that was the goal of bin Laden, was to create, to basically create this kind of whiplash effect to galvanize the Middle East against the U.S., who would definitely have this whiplash response. The funny thing is that even after losing in Iraq, losing in Afghanistan, the U.S. reputation in the Middle East has actually, believe it or not, never been better except for the Israelis, right? Our relationship with the Saudis, even though the Saudis literally did 9/11. Google it. Google it. Google 9/11 victims lawsuit. Saudis did 9/11. And I don't mean Saudi individuals. I mean the Saudi government was complicit in 9/11. You know, Saudi government loves us. Super close relationship now, even though they carved up, you know, a U.S. citizen. That's okay. You get to carve up one U.S. citizen a year if you're one of our friends. The Qataris, great relationship. Syrians, the president of Syria murdered Americans and now is getting his ass kissed by American ambassadors. So how's that? I remember when if you killed American soldiers, that was a fucking death sentence. I don't know. So all this to say, you know, did America, like, despite 9/11, we still managed to actually look like the okay guys in the Middle East, except for the part where we are subsidizing the butchering of Palestinians, like at a massive scale. Ray Taylor, the Americans should not be in Syria. Listen, there is no country where simply visiting it, like, warrants getting you killed. The American government, it is not a capital crime to visit another country. Even I went to North Korea. And then came back. The American government might arrest me and sentence me and put me in jail for a time after a trial, but they wouldn't just shoot me. Not unless I put up a gun and was like, glory to the fucking Korean Workers' Party. Like, okay. Yeah, must be nice to be the Saudis, man. Never paid a price to anything. You can just 9/11 somebody, and we still high five you. We still kiss your ass. I mean, shit. Dana White will go fucking loves the Saudis. That's because in America, and I'm somebody that loves my country, but the subversion of all other values by money in America is the thing that, like, disgusts me, right? We're like nobody is bothered by the president and his family making just like fuckloads of money, because we all go, yeah, dude, making money is good and not making money is bad. This is America. But it's like, no, dude, America, like there are things that are more important than making money. And again, not like I have my own gripes with like the post 9/11 militarization of sort of everything. But service to your country is worth more than money. Like, it is nobler to be a soldier, and I believe this is true today. It is nobler to be a soldier defending your country than it is to be a gajillionaire. Again, and I say this as a dude who is both a soldier and a federal employee, and now a business owner, content creator. And I love it. Don't get me wrong, dudes. Like I love my sponsors. You know, I love you guys supporting me over on Combat Vet News. That makes a huge difference. It lets me do this every day. It's a privilege. I love it. You know, I don't feel bad about it. I live in a capitalist economy. But that is not the noblest thing I've ever done, right? Like, serving my country in a time of war is the noblest contribution I've made, the thing I'm proudest of. Okay. Got one more story. Speaking of oil and gas, I see you guys talking oil and gas. Let's talk about it. Is the Russian oil and gas industry on life support with less than a year left before total collapse? But are the Ukrainians not letting up, burning Russian oil refineries literally on the daily? I'm Paul, U.S. Army combat veteran. Let's talk about the bad direction things are going for poor Russia oil and gas. So, couldn't happen to a nicer guy, but at the current rate, Russia's entire oil refining industry will collapse within about 12 months. This has been a part of a Ukrainian deep strike campaign against Russian oil infrastructure that initially was largely symbolic raids and has now become a systematic dismantling of one of the Kremlin's most important industries. In fact, in the last 45 days, Ukrainian drones have struck 12 different oil refineries, putting a quarter of Russia's total refining capability offline. The scale and tempo suggest that Russia's fuel production is not facing a slow erosion, but kind of a collapse. Now, Russia has about 30 major refineries, and at the current strike rate, with 8 refineries hit every single month, Ukraine could hit every refinery network within 6 months. Now, here's sort of why this is possible, is that you had these symbolic raids, and what they mean is that initially the Ukrainians had long-range drones, but those long-range drones were essentially commercial planes. Think like the single-engine planes that, you know, an individual can buy, $30,000, $40,000 vehicles. And they just packed them full of explosives and fuel and sent them on kind of terminal guidance towards a refinery. And that is a good way to strike them. It often causes delays, but because the actual munitions package is so small, because these aren't really purpose-built weapons, what you end up with is a very low effectiveness of those strikes, right? Those strikes happen, they have to get put out. Sometimes they hit kind of more vulnerable areas, but the refiners are able to get back online. But the Ukrainians have invested a lot into strategic strike weapons. We've talked about the fact that both Ukrainian drones, right? Ukrainian forces now have their own answer to the Shahed. They also have their own ballistic missile, the Flamingo. And so these combined have really taken what used to be little like pitter-pattery kind of harassment and turned it into full-blown destruction, right? We've seen some really tremendous destruction in these refineries, right? Whole refineries are now being put offline by these massed Ukrainian drone strikes. And what's critical about this is that Russia can't always get the parts to bring them back online because of sanctions, because of the faltering Russian economy, because of a huge shortage of Russian air defenses, right? Russia's size is actually being levered against it, because if you're a small country, right, you don't need as many air defense batteries to protect yourself. But in the case of Russia, you have 30 refineries spread out over a fifth of the world's land mass. That's not hyperbole. That's actually how much land Russia occupies, which means you have to be spread way too thin to do it. And you combine this with the fact that Ukrainian drone production is ramping up. What you have is a real struggle by Russia to secure these 30 major refineries. And so the more they get burned down, the harder it is to repair them, the more exacerbated the shortage of repair parts gets, right? And you have what's often referred to as a compounding effect. It says even accounting for Russia's efforts to repair facilities and strengthen defenses, the cumulative effect is already visible. Outages are compounding faster than repairs, and the overall share of disabled capacity continues to climb, right? So now here's the thing. This is refining. So these are refined products, gasoline, diesel, and aviation fuel. They are obviously used domestically for Russians to get their gas, as we've pointed out on this channel. Throughout Russia right now, there are huge gas shortages, particularly for civilian use, because, well, remember, Russia also needs, you know, gas, diesel, and aviation fuel for its war effort. But these are also incredibly profitable to sell refined gasoline and diesel. 24% of the capacity falling off means the Kremlin must export more crude oil at steep discounts while cutting back on refined exports that normally generate higher margins. So if they want to make any money at all from, say, their ships or pipelines, they have to replace refined exports with generally just crude oil that'll be refined somewhere else, and someone else is going to get that profit, right? Now, this, of course, while some of these Western parts are needed for sophisticated control systems and other kind of stuff in modern refining, China can probably try to fill some of the gap. But what I think is most interesting is that we can see in the data here, Russia's fuel and oil export revenue has plummeted in August, right? Sales from crude oil and oil products declined in August, one of the lowest levels seen since the start of the conflict. This is according to the International Energy Agency. And this is, again, a really a squeeze between Ukrainian drone strikes that knock off capability and export and Ukrainian strikes on export pipelines and Western sanctions. So it's funny that that President Trump is out here being like, well, we won't do anything unless every single NATO country stops buying Russian oil. But the truth is that's not necessary. And in fact, if NATO countries were to stop buying Russian oil, it's not clear that it would actually destabilize the market that much, given that India and China are essentially going to be buyers at max volume, right? So, but it doesn't matter because, again, if you can collapse the price or force Russia to sell less and less profitable stuff, it's a little bit like saying, hey, listen, let's say you make $100,000 a year and one day you get fired and you go, that's fine. I'm just going to drive for Uber. But no matter how many hours of Uber you drive, you're never going to be able to offset that $100,000 a year job. You'll offset a little bit. You'll slow a bit the rate of collapse of your personal finances. But as the rent piles up, as the utility bills get backed up more and more, as your savings dwindle, eventually you're going to reach a point where driving for Uber is a waste of time, right? Because the gap between what you need and what you have is just going to be too great. And that is the situation Russia finds itself in. Yeah, it can sell crude oil, but it's never going to sell enough crude oil to stop its military from starving, to stop its people from simply running out of gas entirely. Again, you also see it in places like Kazakhstan, which is producing far less oil. You're just seeing a really just collapse across kind of the Russian world, right? And for the Russian government, this is a pretty big crisis because remember, every single Russian oligarch, and that's the class of person that keeps Vladimir Putin in power, their industries depend on oil and gas, right? Whether you are a nickel miner, whether you are a telecom giant, whatever you are in the Russian oligarchy, you need consumers who can ship things, ship goods and services to and from a place. You need a thriving Russian economy to continue to buy your services. You need sanctions to be lifted so you can sell your services or your stuff to other countries abroad. And for years, the oligarchs have had none of that. And again, to get Putin to stop the war, he needs to be coerced, not by the Russian public, because he can't be voted out of office, but he still relies on a power base. And that power base is sensitive to one thing and one thing only, and that is getting punished in their pocketbooks. And that is what Ukraine has been doing. Okay. Whoa. All right. I see there was some sort of fan funding here. LSA Pentaster. Ooh, gifted memberships. Hell yeah, that's sick, dude. I've never seen gifted memberships. It's been a while since I've seen gifted memberships. Thank you. Yeah. Russia, nickel and dimes are military and society. Yeah, Russia definitely has been trying to do the like boil a frog thing, and that has been the problem, is that it's almost like if the oligarchs of 2022, you could snap your fingers and send them to the Russia of today with 19% inflation, total sanctions collapse, gas shortages, the Russia of today, like they would never buy off the war. They never buy into it. And so I think when you see that stuff, to me, it is it's a tribute basically to how slowly acclimating someone to this war economy, to this isolated sort of world, is actually pretty detrimental to creating it, right? You need that snap shock value to get people to be like, this is unacceptable. Yeah, I mean, I'll say this: JD Vance. JD Vance is amoral, and he's a piece of shit, but he's very smart. He's very smart, and I think there's a part of him that's driven insane by Trump because they see how stupid he is. But JD Vance also believes some like dumb, like Peter Thiel shit. But his stupidity is the same as Peter Thiel's, which is just he has no beliefs that aren't totally self-serving, like totally and utterly self-serving, and that's kind of dangerous. Actually, it makes him more dangerous because he's more strategic, right? Trump is dumb. We just can't argue. I mean, the man can't write, and he doesn't realize that, like he has no consistent beliefs to speak of. He seems unable to understand even basic things. I mean, the evidence that Vance is smart is that he went to Yale Law School as a DEI hire. DEI admit. Poor kid from Ohio or whatever. Okay, guys. Okay. We got one last thing to talk about. Do you guys want to help the Ukrainians defend Kramatorsk in the east? Well, Ukraine Aid Ops has partnered with the best brigades in the Ukrainian military to hold the line in the east. They need drones. They need antennas. They need everything we can get them to keep the Russians at bay. So that's what we're doing. We're working with Ukraine Aid Ops for their Fortress Kramatorsk fundraiser. And best of all, there's an anonymous donor who has said he will match, or she, I don't know, will match up to $300,000 of donations. So every dollar we raise for them is going to be another dollar from our anonymous donor. So if you want to help out the 93rd, the 25th, Azov, the 79th, the 82nd, and the Boys of the U, most of which I've met actually, you want to click the link in the description and get the fundraiser. Plus, they give you guys some sweet hookups. $250 get you a patch of the Kramatorsk Patrol Police, which is pretty sick. And 2 get you actually that patch plus patch from Corvus, the Corvus drone unit of the 93rd. These are literally some of the best drone pilots in the entire Ukrainian military. You can see honestly, I think it's just badass that their official unit patch has a quadcopter drone. I actually had, when I came back, a friend of all the like patches I was given. One of my buddies was like, "That is the coolest patch I've ever seen." So check it out. The link's in the description. And of course, a huge thank you to our Colonel tier members, guys like Yanko, Georgiev, Bastian, Himmerling, Michael Fry, Christian Schumann, Chris Holmes, Deborah Oppenheimer, and all of our Lieutenant tier members. We couldn't do it without you. Hit that subscribe. See you in the next one. Cheers. Okay, and thank you to you guys for joining me. I got to get out of here. It's lunchtime. But I had a lot of fun. I hope you did too. And I will see you guys in the next one. Peace.